It was a bright, sunny day when students from St. Jude's Secondary School in rural Nigeria set out on their annual school trip. This year, they were visiting Olojo Hill, a famous landmark rumored to have mysterious powers. Though most students thought it was just another boring trip, a sense of unease hung over the teachers as they prepared the buses. "Be careful, Olojo Hill has a past," warned Mr. Ade, the history teacher. But the students, including best friends Tunde, Amina, and Chinedu, laughed it off as mere superstition. They were ready for an adventure, not knowing their lives would never be the same after this trip. As they arrived at the base of Olojo Hill, the air seemed thick, almost heavy with an invisible presence. The elders in the village had long warned of the dangers lurking on the hill, but few took the stories seriously anymore. Tunde, always the curious one, led his friends deeper into the forested area surrounding the hill, eager to explore beyond the marked path. Soon they stumbled upon something strange, a shrine hidden beneath vines and overgrown bushes. The shrine was old, its carvings ancient and unreadable. But as Tunde touched the cold stone surface, an icy wind whipped through the forest, causing a loud cracking sound that echoed ominously. The moment Tunde's hand touched the shrine, something shifted in the air. Birds that had been chirping moments ago went silent, and the wind grew eerily still. Amina, sensing the sudden change, tugged at Tunde's sleeve. "We should go back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Tunde, intrigued by the hidden shrine's presence, brushed off her concerns. "Come on, it's just an old stone," he said, but his words felt hollow even to him. They returned to the main group just as the teachers called them back for the next leg of the hike. Everything seemed normal at first, but when they reached the top of the hill, Chinedu suddenly collapsed, gasping for air. Panic spread through the group as they surrounded him. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't looking at anyone. He was staring past them, as if seeing something far away. His body began to convulse, and he muttered something none of them could understand. "What is he saying?" Amina asked, her voice trembling. A chill ran through everyone as Chinedu's words became clearer. "They're here. They're watching." Then, just as suddenly as it started, Chinedu stopped convulsing and passed out. After Chinedu was rushed to the village clinic, the rest of the students and teachers were allowed to continue the trip, but the joy had been sucked out of the day. Tunde couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had happened at the shrine. That night, back at school, he, Amina, and a few others met in the dormitory to talk about the day's events. "It was the shrine," Tunde said with certainty. "Ever since I touched it, things have felt off." But Amina wasn't convinced. "You're being paranoid," she argued, though her hands trembled as she spoke. Later that night, something woke Tunde from his sleep. The room was cold, much colder than usual. He glanced around the dark room and saw a figure standing by the window, tall, shadowy, and completely still. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat up. "Who's there?" he whispered, but no one responded. As he reached for the light switch, the figure vanished. He flicked the light on, but the room was empty, his roommates fast asleep. Shaken, Tunde lay back down, but sleep eluded him. Was it his imagination, or was something really watching him? The next morning, chaos erupted in the school. One of the students, Bolaji, was missing. He had gone to bed the night before, but hadn't been seen since. His friends assumed he had woken up early and left for town, but when his bed was found untouched and his belongings still there, panic set in. The teachers immediately organized a search party, but hours went by with no sign of Bolaji. "This isn't like him," his best friend Femi said, trembling. "He wouldn't just disappear like this." As the search intensified, rumors began to spread among the students. Some whispered about kidnappings, others about forest spirits. Tunde overheard a group of juniors talking in hushed tones. "They say Olojo Hill is cursed," one of them said. "My grandmother always warned me about it." Chinedu, still weak from his collapse, listening quietly. When Tunde asked if he remembered anything from the day before, Chinedu shook his head. "Just darkness," he whispered. "I saw nothing but darkness." That night, after hours of searching for Bolaji, Tunde, Amina, and Chinedu gathered once again to discuss the strange events. "It's not just a coincidence," Amina finally admitted. "First, the shrine. Then Chinedu's collapse. Now Bolaji is missing." Tunde nodded grimly. "We need to figure out what's going on," he said, determination in his voice. Chinedu, still pale and shaky, agreed, though his fear was evident. As they talked, a loud bang came from outside the dormitory. They rushed to the window and saw a figure standing under the moonlight. It was Balaji. Relief washed over them, but it quickly turned to dread when they saw the vacant look in his eyes. He stood motionless, staring at nothing, his mouth slightly open as if whispering to someone unseen. "Balaji!" Tunde shouted, rushing outside, but by the time they reached him, he had disappeared again. Balaji's brief return spread through the school like wildfire. Some believed he had been possessed, while others thought he was playing a cruel prank. But Tunde, Amina, and Chinedu knew something far more sinister was at play. "It's the shrine," Tunde insisted once more. "We need to go back and find out what we unleashed." Amina, though skeptical, knew they had little choice. Balaji was still missing, and strange occurrences were becoming more frequent around the school. Voices whispering in empty rooms, lights flickering, and the feeling of being watched. After school, they decided to return to Olojo Hill. Armed with flashlights and a growing sense of dread, they retraced their steps back to the hidden shrine. The moment they arrived, the wind picked up, swirling around them like an invisible force. "We shouldn't be here," Chinedu muttered, his voice trembling. But Tunde pressed on, determined to find answers. As they approached the shrine, the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. At the shrine, the carvings on the stone that had once been unreadable now glowed faintly, revealing strange symbols that none of them recognized. "What does it mean?" Amina asked, running her fingers over the cool stone. Just as she touched it, a shock of energy jolted through her, and her eyes clouded over as if she had gone into a trance. "Amina?" Tunde shouted, shaking her, but she remained unresponsive. Chinedu, frightened, backed away, but before he could flee, the ground beneath them began to rumble. The shrine seemed to come alive. Moments later, Amina snapped back to consciousness, gasping for air. I saw something," she stammered, her voice shaky. "It was an ancestor, I think. He said the debt must be repaid." The air around them grew cold, and the wind whispered words they could not understand. "We need to leave," Chinedu yelled, his fear growing. But as they turned to go, they saw the path behind them was gone, swallowed by the forest. The spirits were not done with them yet. That night, all three of them were plagued with nightmares. Tunde dreamt of the shrine, only this time it was surrounded by hundreds of shadowy figures. They whispered his name, calling him closer. He tried to run, but his feet were stuck to the ground. The shadows crept closer until they were all he could see. Amina, on the other hand, dreamt of her family, only they weren't themselves. Their eyes were hollow, and they spoke in strange voices, warning her to leave the village before it was the worst of all. He dreamt of the hill again, but this time it was burning. The flames reached the sky, and he could hear the screams of his classmates trapped inside the fire. "Help us," they called to him, but he was frozen, unable to move. When he awoke, drenched in sweat, he realized the screaming hadn't stopped. It was coming from outside his window. He rushed to the window, heart pounding, but the courtyard was empty. Was he still dreaming, or was something far more terrifying at play? Desperate for answers, Tunde, Amina, and Chinedu decided to seek help from the village elders. The elders were the keepers of the town's history and spiritual knowledge. If anyone knew about the shrine and the strange events that had started to unfold, it would be them. They went to the oldest elder, Baba Iroko, a man known for his wisdom and ties to the old ways. Baba Iroko listened quietly as they explained everything that had happened. The shrine, the missing student, the strange figures, and the nightmares. When they finished, he sighed heavily. "You have awakened something that was meant to stay asleep," he said gravely. "The shrine is tied to our ancestors, but not all spirits rest peacefully. Some seek vengeance for wrongs that have never been righted." He looked at them with sad eyes. "You must find a way to appease the spirits before more lives are taken. The village's future depends on it." Baba Iroko revealed a chilling story from the village's past. Centuries ago, their ancestors had committed a great betrayal. A group of elders had made a pact with a powerful spirit in exchange for protection and prosperity. But when it came time to fulfill their end of the bargain, they broke their promise. The spirit, enraged by the betrayal, cursed the village and sealed its vengeance within the shrine at Olojo Hill. The curse lay dormant for generations, but now, thanks to the students' discovery, it had been reawakened. The only way to stop the spirits from consuming the village was to complete the pact that had been broken. But how? Amina asked, fear creeping into her voice. Baba Iroko looked grave. You must find the original object of the pact, hidden deep within the hill. Only then can the spirits be appeased. But beware, the journey will not be easy, and the spirits will not let you succeed without a fight. Tunde, Amina, and Chinedu set out on the dangerous quest to find the object that could break the curse. Baba Iroko had given them a crude map, drawn on old parchment showing the secret path deep into Olojo Hill. Stay together, he warned them. The spirits will try to separate you. Don't trust your eyes and don't listen to any voices, no matter how familiar they sound. That evening, the three friends prepared for the journey. Tunde packed a flashlight and his father's old machete, while Amina brought a small pouch of salt and herbs given to her by Baba Iroko to ward off evil spirits. Chinedu, still weak from his earlier encounter with the shrine, carried only a bottle of water and his resolve to see this through. The atmosphere was tense as they gathered in the forest near the foot of Olojo Hill. Darkness had fallen and the moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the land. As they entered the dense forest, the air became thick and heavy, as if the trees themselves were watching them. Every rustle of leaves made them jump. Every gust of wind whispered their names. Don't listen, Tunde reminded them, gripping his machete tightly. But as they ventured deeper, the voices became louder, more insistent, calling them by name in voices that sounded like their loved ones. As they followed the map deeper into the forest, the terrain became more treacherous. The ground beneath their feet grew softer, almost as if it were alive, and the air grew colder with every step. We're getting close, Tunde whispered, his breath visible in the frigid air. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath Amina, and she let out a cry as she fell into a hidden pit. Amina! Tunde and Chinedu rushed to the edge, only to find her clinging to a root dangling above darkness that seemed to have no bottom. Hold on! Chinedu shouted, grabbing a branch to help pull her up. But as they reached for her, a thick fog rolled in, obscuring their vision. The voices returned, louder now, speaking in a language they didn't understand. The fog twisted around them, separating Tunde from the others. Tunde! Amina screamed as she lost sight of him. In the thick of the fog, Tunde heard the voice of his late mother calling to him. Tunde, my son, come to me, she whispered. His heart raced, his mind torn between the need to help Amina and the pull of his mother's voice. But he remembered Baba Iroko's warning and forced himself to resist the urge. It's not real, he muttered, closing his eyes to block out the fog and voices. Suddenly, the fog lifted, and Tunde was back at the pit's edge, helping Chinedu pull Amina to safety. We need to keep moving, Tunde said, though his voice was shaky. They knew now that the spirits were trying to break them, to separate them, but they couldn't give up. They pressed on, determined to finish the heart of Olojo Hill. The forest around them began to change. The trees became twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The ground was littered with bones. Whether human or animal, they couldn't tell. Every few steps they heard faint whispers, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a young woman, dressed in traditional attire, her hair flowing like a river. She seemed to glide over the ground, her feet never touching the earth. Tunde instinctively raised his machete, but the woman did not approach them. Instead, she beckoned silently, motioning for them to follow her. Who is she? Amina whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know, Tunde replied, but she seems to know where she's going. Chinedu, exhausted from the journey, was hesitant, but they had little choice. They followed the woman deeper into the forest, the path growing narrower and more treacherous with each step. As they walked, the woman never spoke, but her presence seemed to ward off the spirits that had been tormenting them. The whispers faded, and the air became less oppressive. For the first time since they'd begun the journey, they felt a glimmer of hope. But just as they began to trust their mysterious guide, she stopped abruptly in front of a large stone altar hidden beneath a canopy of trees. Without a word, she pointed to the altar, her eyes locking with Tunde's before she disappeared into the shadows. "What does this mean?" Amina asked, her voice trembling. Tunde approached the altar, his heart pounding. There, lying in the center of the stone, was an ancient artifact, an ornate staff decorated with carvings that matched the symbols they had seen at the shrine. "This is it," Tunde whispered, reaching for the staff. "This is what we need to end the curse." As soon as Tunde's fingers closed around the staff, the ground beneath them rumbled. The forest came alive with an eerie energy, and the trees swayed as if a great storm had suddenly descended upon them. "We need to leave," Chinedu shouted, his eyes wide with terror. But before they could move, a booming voice echoed through the air, shaking the very ground they stood on. "You dare take what does not belong to you," the voice bellowed, resonating from deep within the earth. The spirits had awoken, and they were not pleased. Suddenly, ghostly figures began to emerge from the trees, their faces twisted in anger and sorrow. They surrounded the group, blocking every possible escape route. The air grew cold once again, and the wind howled through the trees like a wailing cry of the dead. "Put it back," Amina cried, but Tunde stood firm, clutching the staff tightly. "This is the only way," he said, though doubt nodded, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You have awakened the anger of the ancestors," it said in a voice that sent chills down their spines. "The debt must be repaid." "We didn't mean to awaken anything," Tunde shouted. "We just want to stop this curse." The spirit seemed to consider his words for a moment, but its expression remained cold. "The curse will only end when the blood that was promised is given," it replied. "You have taken what belongs to the spirits, and now you must pay the price." As the spirits closed in on them, Tunde knew they had no choice. They would have to confront the spirits and find a way to make things right, or risk losing everything. The spirits didn't attack immediately. Instead, they formed a circle around Tunde, Amina, and Chinedu, their ghostly figures swaying like shadows in the wind. One of the spirits, the same one who had spoken earlier, stepped forward. "You wish to end the curse," it said, its voice deep and echoing. "But the path to redemption is not easy. You must prove your worth." Tunde, still clutching the staff, felt a sense of dread wash over him. "What do we need to do?" he asked cautiously. The spirit pointed to the staff. "The staff holds the power of the ancestors. To wield it, you must be pure of heart and true of spirit. If you are found lacking, the curse will consume you and your village." Amina stepped forward, her voice shaking. "We didn't mean to disturb the spirits. We just want to save our friend Balaji and end this nightmare." The spirit gazed at her for a moment before speaking. "Your intentions may be good, but the spirits demand more than words. You must pass the test." The spirit raised its hand, and the ground beneath them began to shift. Suddenly, 3 glowing orbs appeared in front of Tunde, Amina and Chinedu, each one pulsing with an otherworldly energy. "These orbs represent the spirit's demand," the spirit said, its voice ominous. "To break the curse, one of you must offer something of great value, something irreplaceable. Only then will the spirits consider ending their vengeance." Tunde's heart sank as he stared at the glowing orbs. What could they possibly offer? Amina looked at the orb in front of her, her mind racing. "What do they want from us?" she whispered. "Our lives? Our souls?" Chinedu, weak and frightened, stepped back. "I didn't sign up for this. I thought we were just trying to help Bolaji, not sacrifice ourselves." The spirit's gaze fell upon Tunde. "The choice is yours," it said. "The staff you hold has the power to end this, but only if you prove your worth. One of you must make the ultimate sacrifice." Tunde felt the weight of the staff in his hand, its energy coursing through him. He knew what the spirit meant. One of them would have to give up something precious, something they could never get back. He looked at Amina and Chinedu, his closest friends. Could he really ask one of them to make such a sacrifice? "I'll do it," Tunde said, his voice steady but filled with fear. "I'll make the sacrifice." Amina's eyes widened in shock. "Tunde, no, you don't even know what they're asking for," she cried, grabbing his arm. But Tunde shook his head. "We don't have a choice," he replied, looking into her eyes. "If we don't do this, the curse will destroy our village. We can't let that happen." The spirit stepped closer, its presence cold and foreboding. "Are you certain?" it asked. "Once you offer the sacrifice, there is no going back." Tunde nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm sure," he said, though fear gripped him tightly. The spirit raised its hand again, and the orb in front of Tunde began to glow even brighter. "Then make your offering," the spirit commanded. "Speak the words, and the spirits will accept your sacrifice." Tunde took a deep breath, his mind racing. He didn't know what to say, but deep down he knew what he had to offer. He thought of his family, his home, and everything he loved. He thought of his future, of the dreams he had for his life. And then, with a trembling voice, he spoke. "I offer my freedom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I will give up my chance at happiness, at a future, if it means saving my friends and my village." The words hung in the air, and for a moment everything was silent. Then, the orb in front of Tunde exploded into a brilliant light, engulfing him in its glow. Amina and Chinedu watched in horror as Tunde's body was lifted off the ground, his eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the orb. "Tunde!" Amina screamed, reaching out to him, but it was too late. The spirits had accepted his sacrifice. As the light faded, Tunde fell to the ground, gasping for breath. His body felt heavy, as if the very life had been drained from him. Amina and Chinedu rushed to his side, but when they looked into his eyes, they saw something had changed. The light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "Tunde, are you okay?" Amina asked, her voice trembling with fear. I don't know," Tunde whispered, his voice weak. He could feel the weight of his sacrifice pressing down on him, like a shadow that would never leave. He had given up his future, his freedom, and now he was bound to the spirits in a way he could never fully understand. The spirit looked down at him, its expression unreadable. "The sacrifice has been made," it said, its voice softer now. "The curse will be lifted, but the spirits will always demand their due. You have given up your freedom, Tunde," as the words hit him like a blow. He had saved his village, but at what cost? He would never be free again. With the sacrifice made, the spirits began to retreat. The ghostly figures that had surrounded them slowly faded into the mist, their voices growing quieter until they were nothing more than a distant echo. The forest returned to its eerie silence, and the oppressive energy that had weighed down on them lifted. Amina and Chinedu helped Tunde to his feet, but they could see the toll the sacrifice had taken on him. His once bright and determined eyes were now dull and lifeless, as if a part of him had been taken away. "We need to get back to the village," Amina said, her voice filled with urgency. "We need to tell the elders what happened." Tunde nodded, though his body felt heavy and his mind was clouded with doubt. The journey back to the village was long and filled with an uneasy silence. None of them spoke, each lost in their own thoughts, unsure of what the future held. When they finally arrived at the village, they were greeted with shock and relief. The curse had lifted, the nightmares had stopped, the strange occurrences had ended, but the village elders could see the price that had been paid. Tunde's sacrifice had saved them, but it had also bound him to the spirits in a way that no one could undo. As the villagers celebrated their newfound peace, Baba Iroko came to Tunde, his face grave. "You have done a great thing, my boy," he said, placing a hand on Tunde's shoulder. "But the spirits will not forget the sacrifice you made. They will always be watching, always waiting." Tunde nodded, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he had given up. "I know," he replied, his voice barely a whisper, "but it was worth it, to save everyone." Baba Iroko's eyes darkened. "Beware, Tunde. The spirits are fickle, and their demands are never truly satisfied. You must be careful, for they will test you again." Tunde didn't respond, but deep down he knew the old man was right. The spirits had taken his freedom, and they would never stop reminding him of the debt he now owed. Days passed, and the village returned to normal, but for Tunde, nothing felt the same. His friends and family tried to comfort him, but he could no longer find joy in their words or laughter. He wandered through the village in a daze, feeling like a stranger in his own home. Amina and Chinedu visited him often, worried about his state of mind. "Tunde, you've done something no one else could. You've saved us all," Amina said one evening as they sat by the riverbank. "I know," Tunde replied, staring into the water, "but I can't shake this feeling. Like something is missing inside me. The spirits took more than just my freedom." Chinedu nodded, his face serious. "We all saw what happened in the forest, Tunde. You're bound to them now. But that doesn't mean you have to stop living. We need you here. He smiled faintly. Your family needs you. Emptiness in his eyes remained. I wish it were that simple, he muttered. As night fell, a cold wind swept through the village, and Tunde felt the spirit's presence lingering, watching him from the shadows. They had lifted the curse, but the weight of his sacrifice would never truly leave him. One night, Tunde was jolted awake by a vivid nightmare. In his dream, he stood in the middle of the forest, surrounded by the same spirits who had demanded his sacrifice. Their ghostly faces were twisted with anger, their voices a low, menacing chant. "You owe us," they whispered in unison. "Your debt is not paid. We will return." Tunde gasped for air, his heart racing as he sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. The room was quiet, but the feeling of the spirit's presence lingered, as if they were just beyond the walls watching him. For the next few nights, the dreams continued. Each time, the spirit's voices grew louder, more insistent. Tunde tried to push them from his mind, but they followed him into his waking hours. He would hear their whispers in the rustling of the trees, see their faces in the flicker of a candle. Amina noticed the change in him and urged him to speak with Baba Iroko. "He might know what to do," she insisted. "You can't keep living like this." But Tunde shook his head. "The spirits are my burden now," he said quietly. "I have to face them alone." Amina, however, was not one to give up easily. Determined to help her friend, she began searching for answers on her own. She went to the village elders, asking about the spirits and the sacrifices they demanded. Most of them shrugged her off, saying the spirits had been appeased and there was nothing more to be done. But one elder, an old woman named Mama Iyabo, pulled her aside after hearing her questions. "The spirits don't forget, my dear," Mama Iyabo said, her voice low. "They may have lifted the curse, but they will never release the one who made the sacrifice." "What can I do?" Amina asked, desperate. "How can I help him?" Mama Iyabo shook her head sadly. "There is no easy answer. Tunde is bound to the spirits now, but there is one thing you can try. Deep in the forest, near the old shrine, there is a hidden spring. They say its waters have the power to cleanse the soul of any spiritual debt. But be warned, it is not an easy path, and many who have sought it have never returned." Amina's heart raced. She had heard stories of the spring, but no one had ever dared to go in search of it. Still, she knew she had to try, for Tunde's sake. The next morning, Amina told Tunde of Mama Iyabo's words. "We have to find this spring," she said, her eyes full of determination. "It might be the only way to free you from the spirits." Tunde was skeptical. "I don't want you to risk your life for me," he said. "But Amina, you've already been through enough for an answer." "I'm not leaving you to face this alone," she said firmly. "We've been through too much together. If there's even a chance this spring can help, we have to try." Reluctantly, Tunde agreed, and the two of them set off early the next morning, leaving the village behind. They made their way deep into the forest, following the path that led toward the old shrine. The further they went, the thicker the trees became, and soon, the light of the sun was barely visible through the dense canopy. The forest seemed alive with whispers, the spirits watching their every move. But Amina and Tunde pressed on, determined to find the spring.